America has found that it hasn't got other people to lower tariffs by behaving gently, and he's gone in with a big stick. I don't think it's the right way to make policy, but it may prove to be effective. And if it does prove to be effective, both the UK and the US consumer will benefit.
Trumpageddon is upon us. Day 2 after Liberation Day, Retaliation Day. Although, is that the right way to respond to Donald Trump announcing tariffs for nearly every country in the world?
We're going to hear from Jacob Rees-Mogg and find out why he thinks the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, a Romaniac, let's be honest, should embrace his inner Brexiteer and turn the UK into Singapore-on-Sea.
24 hours in, Camilla, Liberation Day was yesterday, Retaliation Day possibly today, markets on the way down, lots of economists saying that recession risk in America has increased. 20% tariffs on the EU, 10% on good old Blighty, higher for countries like China. He has genuinely changed the dial on the economy. He did this amazing 47-minute speech, Camilla, which, if you were American and watching it, and this is what Brian Glenn said to us yesterday, you get a completely different view from the view that we outside America, when we see the clips and we all react mostly very negatively. This is a montage of what he put together for the American people on the White House lawn.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago, and you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen. I'd like to see the chart if you have it. Could you bring it up, Howard? This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So, if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here, we didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less, so how can anybody be upset? They will be, because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly, they rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. United Kingdom, 10%, and we'll go 10%, so we'll do the same thing.
His rhetoric compared to Keir Starmer's, Kamal, is just, I mean, it's starkly different. We've now got number 10 wanting to take credit for the fact that we've only been hit with 10% rather than 20%. I think a White House official has basically debunked that theory and said, no, that's not quite right.
Can we say why that is as well? So I don't think it is right. I think that's your point yesterday was that Keir Starmer hasn't got special treatment. What they've done, they have done a very straightforward equation on the amount of trade a country does with America and America does back with that country, it is then made that the baseline for what these tariffs are going to be. And the fact that the UK is in rough balance on goods and on goods trade means that we've come out at the 10% level. But that's been exactly the same for Brazil, for Colombia, for Australia, for Chile, and remarkably for Afghanistan.
Yeah,
so
the
the
Taliban.
The Taliban government has got exactly the same deal as we have. So the White House official that you're quoting is absolutely correct. This is a simple equation. It is nothing to do with political relationships.
Let's just listen to how Sir Keir Starmer has reacted to what Donald Trump announced last night.
But I want to be crystal clear. We are prepared. Indeed, one of the great strengths of this nation is our ability to keep a cool head. I said that in my first speech as Prime Minister, and that is how I govern. That is how we have planned, and that is exactly what is required today. Nobody wins in a trade war. That is not in our national interest. We have a fair and balanced trade relationship with the US. Negotiations on an economic prosperity deal, one that strengthens our existing trading relationship. They continue, and we will fight for the best deal for Britain. Nonetheless, I want to be clear. I will only strike a deal if it is in our national interest, and if it is the right thing to do for the security of working people, protects the pound in their pocket that they work so hard to earn for their families. That is my priority. That is always my priority.
As is ever the case, Kamal, I kind of look at America with mixed feelings. Part of me is quite envious of these bold moves. I mean, I remember looking at the executive orders, men are men, women are women, men can't compete in female sport, can all federal employees come back to the office, drill baby drill. I mean, I even quite like the cut of his jib on a degree of protectionism, just in terms of firing up his own manufacturing and productivity. I mean, I think one of the deficiencies of the Thatcher era was shutting down coal mines and other manufacturing far too quickly and too swiftly and not replacing it with alternatives. I appreciate that there were cost efficiencies to consider back in the 80s and 90s. But we're now in this era of the Vauxhall plant closed down last week, in fact. Reports of how people in Scunthorpe are feeling about our last steelworks closing. And it does make me feel quite depressed. And I think, where are the jobs of the future going to come from? According to the Labour government, they're going to come from the green economy, whatever that is. We keep on being promised, don't we, these thousands of mythical green jobs growing out of nowhere. Is there something for Britain to be learned here from this America First approach, just when it comes to what we're making, Kamal? What do you think?
I think we slightly over-romanticise our manufacturing past. So I think we need to be careful. We're a small trading economy in comparison with America. In America, they produce, I think it's around 70% of their economy is based on American demand. So they're quite internally self-sufficient already. The UK is nothing like that. We create our wealth by trading. And the more that we try and protect our trade, the more the people that we trade with will do the same thing. That's real reciprocal tariffs. So if we say, right, we want to defend steel making, so we'll put some tariffs on India, for example, or China. Well, India and China then say, well, we don't want your products. This is where, in his speech, Donald Trump went right back to the 19th century. William McKinley, his favourite president, who put on these tariffs. The reason it all broke down was because America wants to trade with the rest of the world, because it creates American wealth. And in the end, America had to bring down the tariffs so that people would buy America in the rest of the world. And if we, Camilla, want people to buy British, you know, if you look at the economics, the orthodox economics is that it is better to have free trade because more people will buy externally our goods, and that creates wealth for inside the UK. So I've had a look. So today, for example, the Institute of Economic Affairs, a very right, it's on the right side of the political spectrum. It's Reaganite, Thatcherite. it has been so critical of what Trump is doing because it is economically very difficult to see how tax on borders of nation states can have any effect apart from inflation, lower productivity, because you are reducing competition. Their quote says, Donald Trump's new tariff schedule is a complete random mess. It demonstrates one thing quite clearly. Any attempts to figure out what goes on in that man's mind and to influence it by responding with a tariff strategy of our own are a waste of time. Trump's economic folly is bad enough as it is. If other governments now respond with similarly foolish retaliatory measures, it would only compound Trump's errors. Kemi Badenoch has just retweeted Ronald Reagan, saying that free trade was the great thing that created wealth. So what I do agree with you, unorthodoxy is necessary at times. And we have been through so many decades of orthodoxy and so many people have missed out. I am, like you, excited by the fact of disruption. But I cannot see, with the degree of economic knowledge I have, that this is going to lead to the wealth that he believes it will.
Look, don't get me wrong. Am I worried about the stock market plunging? Of course I am. And our situation's better than the Asian markets, which have taken a right pummeling. Am I worried about our pensions? Of course. Am I worried about inflation? Yes. Cost of goods is already much higher than that 2 point whatever figure. We see it in our supermarket trolleys. Okay, so I'm worried about all that. I suppose the point is he, if we aren't going to retaliate with tariffs, but we're actually going to respond with a free trade negotiation, then that does get us back into the space of pre-1973, when we joined the EU in the first place. You know, before that period, we were a free trading nation, a proud free trading nation. You know, Robert Peel and beyond, let's do deals with the rest of the world. You know, we were the masters of the art of the deal. We were the wheeler dealers, Kamal. So if we get into a situation now, ironically, where these tariffs push a Labour, Remain supporting government into trying to do a deal with America to bring down all trade barriers, not just tariff barriers, but trade barriers, deregulate to an extent, then finally, we may have actually maximised some of our post-Brexit advantages. I mean, it's only taken, nearly a decade to realise the referendum dream, but that could surely be a good thing. You know, I'm pretty excited about the idea of a free trade deal with America. I know our farmers aren't, but I'm quite excited by it.
They worry about that a lot of product will come here, which might undermine the British farming sector. Donald Trump, this has to be deliberate, does not include large parts of services when he is considering trade flows between America and the rest of the world. And of course, one of America's biggest exports is banking and global banking, in which they have a trade surplus with everybody in the world. So actually, a free trade in banking is incredibly good for the United States. It'll be interesting to see. Another point that the Institute for Economic Affairs make is, will this be consistent? So next week, will there be a new announcement that some things are going to be actually taken out of these tariff barriers, that he's going to change some of the rules for different countries? And if you're a business and you're planning 3, 5, 10 years ahead, and you've mentioned things like steel making and advanced manufacturing and which markets do I look to exploit? You're going to look to exploit the markets where there's consistency. You're not going to invest loads of capital in a new manufacturing piece of kit in this country to export to America if you think that America is going to be 1 minute saying one thing, another minute saying another. So the danger for Donald Trump is that people see America as less attractive to export to. His bet is that America is big enough and ugly enough in the world market to be able to wear that. What happens now to this free trade idea that we have, this free trade possibility of a free trade deal? Is it oven ready? We're not absolutely clear. Let's hear Nick Robinson asking Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, this morning on the Today programme, that exact question.
I want not only to remove what has been announced so far, but to strengthen that relationship. I want more UK businesses with stronger market access to all parts of the US. That's the prize on offer for us.
Now, the word in Whitehall is that you've actually got a deal ready to go, that there are some people in the Trump administration who have already agreed to the outlines of a deal. It just hasn't reached the president's desk yet. Is that right?
That is not an accurate, I think, reflection of where we are at. We have made the kind of
listeners
offer.
don't have the joy of seeing you as I do, and you smiled broadly when I said that.
Look, we believe we have made more progress on this issue of the relationship between the US and the UK than actually to date anyone has managed to do before. Of course, there are issues still to resolve as part of that, but the work of the Prime Minister in terms of rebuilding the UK's relationship profile on the world stage, the engagement he has had with the President, as your previous interviewee clearly said, went very well. He's given us the space to do that, to people like me and my counterparts on the US side, to have these more detailed conversations. So, of course, that has been an opportunity for us to progress. And I say again...
So the deal's not oven ready, to coin a phrase. It's what? It's, you've written the menu, you know what it looks like, you've just got to chuck it in the oven.
Look, it means that we are engaging in the UK's national interest in a way which I think can deliver for every part of the UK. We are disappointed with where we are this morning because of what has been announced, but we do believe this approach is the way to get the right way through that.
Reynolds there hoping for the best, but the government needs to prepare for the worst. And actually, later on in the day, when he was speaking to the House of Commons, Reynolds made clear that they are still keeping a possible plan for retaliatory tariffs on the table.
I guess the most pressing question, as ever, is what it means for our individual wallets. And let's be honest, they haven't had as much money in them recently because of the cost of living crisis. We've discussed the budget and Rachel Reeves' jobs tax, as the Tories are now calling it. The Chancellor appeared before a select committee earlier in the week. She was trying to justify this idea that we'll all be better off. I think most people are feeling much, much worse off. Also, she's making changes to ISAs and things. So I suppose anyone with any investments, Kamal, how should they react to this?
Well, we have seen what's called the flight to safety. So gold, for example, is up at record levels now. If the stock markets are plunging around the world, which we are seeing, then that will affect our pension funds, affect our investments. And that is an immediate reaction you get today. Anyone looking at their portfolio will see that there's a lot of red on there. So there is an impact of what Donald Trump is doing, which is immediate. Longer term, there's an odd, slight silver lining. Flight to safety also means that people start buying government bonds much more readily because they are seen as a safe asset when equities are volatile. That means that Rachel Reeves' borrowing costs are coming down. And one of the biggest risks to the Labour government was that our borrowing costs were going up. But markets are about competitive risk. So if America is seen as more risky, money starts coming back to the UK, to Japan, because people are looking for security, for stability. So oddly, although in terms of our exports, I think is it about 60 billion pounds worth of exports to the US every year, the borrowing costs of the UK, which are one of the reasons why Rachel Reeves is always on the edge of wrecking her fiscal rules and having to bring in more tax rises, have actually come down slightly. This is the weird world of economics. So in a weird way, in the Treasury, they might be sitting there going, yeah, not so great for our businesses. That's a problem. Recession risk. JP Morgan said in America, recession risk had gone much, much higher than it was before the Trump announcement. But our borrowing costs, which cost us so much money every year, have actually come down a notch.
I thought this this morning. I thought, God, this government is quite lucky. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but this is all masking all of their domestic problems. Loads of reports this week about the punitive effect of VAT on private school fees, for instance. No one's talking about it. Nobody's talking about Ed Miliband's ineptitude in his quest for net zero, which no one in the government seems to be able to cost at all, and all the rest of it. We've had a degree of luck with the whole Zelensky-Putin situation, suddenly making Keir Starmer look like a leading global statesman by trying to steady that ship. You've then got us seeming to have fared better than the Europeans. And although we've heard from the White House saying it's nothing to do with Starmer's negotiating tactics, of course Labour will insist it is. You've then got potentially positive economic headwinds in terms of our borrowing costs, which again have just fallen into Rachel Reeves' lap. There's a degree of luck going on here, don't you think?
Well, I suppose, world events, bad and good,
Well, that's
are
the
what
other
governments
thing.
have to deal with.
Also, they've got someone to blame. If everything goes wrong, blame it all on Trump's tariffs.
The other
That's
thing
convenient.
as well, on those other issues, those domestic issues, what it also does is it sucks the oxygen out of reform, out of Kemi Badenoch, even out of the poor old Lib Dems. If people are talking about Trump, they may talk a little bit about Keir Starmer. They're not going to talk about much else.
Well, coming up next, with the European Union getting slapped with a 20% Trump tariff as opposed to our 10, can we be thankful for Brexit? Kamal, at last, we've been waiting for this moment. One of the original Spartans, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, joins us in the studio next to tell us how we can now finally maximise our post-referendum potential. Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Tory MP and fierce Brexiteer, joins us now. No doubt on a note of celebration. Thank goodness we have left the EU, Jacob, because we have now had some sort of special arrangement carved out for Britain by Donald Trump. Would you agree with that analysis?
Oh, that's absolutely right, that it does two things. One is that the tariff applied to us is 10% rather than 20%, which saves tens of thousands of jobs potentially. But even more importantly, we won't have to follow the EU's response. So we will be free not only not to retaliate, but to open up our markets to the US and perhaps get something in return. It's a really very positive additional Brexit benefit.
Quick follow-up question to that then. Number 10 is quite keen to say that the reason we've been given preferential treatment is because of how well the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has negotiated this. Do you actually think that that's relevant or not? Or is it just because of our status outside of the Brussels bloc?
Well, if you look at Australia and New Zealand and Saudi Arabia, a lot of friendly countries have got a 10% tariff rather than a 20% tariff. But I think Starmer has actually handled it quite well. I think he's been right not to threaten retaliation. It's really important that he doesn't retaliate, which would be an incredibly stupid thing to do. This uses some of his political capital. It's not for him risk-free not retaliating. It's not for him risk-free getting rid of the tax on the internet companies, on Apple and so on, the technology companies. That isn't risk-free, particularly with the left of his party. And so I think he deserves some credit, but would it have been a 20% tariff if it hadn't been for Starmer? No, it wouldn't have been, because we don't have much of a trade surplus or deficit with the US on their calculations.
Tell us about where next for the UK. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, has been doing the rounds this morning saying we are still negotiating on some form of free trade deal. You've been in that job. What would you be saying now if you were still in government to the Americans about where and can we become this idea of Singapore on Thames, this very free trade nation in the European continent, but not in the European Union?
Well, I would look at what we've done already. So on medicines, we've done the very sensible thing of recognising the approval of drugs by the FDA in the United States, by the Japanese, by the Australians, the Singaporeans, the EU and Switzerland. And those drugs, once approved, can be sold in the UK without needing to go through their own separate approvals process and trials. That's a huge saving in cost for businesses in those countries, but also, of course, for consumers in the UK who get access to drugs faster. So I think there's a model of mutual recognition of the regulations of safe countries. So there'll be some countries where we wouldn't trust their medical testing. The countries I've mentioned, we do. So where would I extend that? I'd extend that to financial services. I think we should be looking at mutual recognition of the regulation of financial services done in the US, I hope on a reciprocal basis. That would be very, very beneficial for one of our most successful, indeed also one of the US's most successful businesses. I'd look at removing tariffs. Why do we have an effective 12% tariff on US cars? That should go. US cars may be a bit big for our roads, but nonetheless, if people want to drive them, they should be free to do so and not penalised. It's those sorts of things. We can get rid of the tariff barriers, we can get rid of the non-tariff barriers, we can open up for free trade, ideally reciprocally.
You said in your Substack today around that there are some glimmers of hopes some glimmers of hope from the announcements in America, but also there are some risks. I just wondered what your thoughts were on, we have this issue, don't we, that it is Great Britain and Northern Ireland very directly in terms of our relationship with the European Union. If Great Britain becomes Singapore on Sea, does that make that border in the Irish Sea more problematic for us?
Oh, well, we should withdraw from the Windsor Framework, which was a disgraceful surrender of Northern Ireland's interest to the European superstate. There's an excellent article by Fred Fossard in The Critic magazine that is showing what the EU is trying to do in extending AI as goods into Northern Ireland and saying its AI regulations should apply in Northern Ireland. It's absolute nonsense. It's nothing to do with the single market. It is not a good that should be affected by EU regulations, but they are trying to strangle Northern Ireland. We should never have agreed to the Windsor Framework, and a new Conservative government should rescind it as soon as possible.
Can I just get real for a moment? I love this talk about Singapore on Sea. I liked it during the referendum campaign. I believe the former Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is writing precisely this piece for The Telegraph, which will be on the website later. But let's just have a reality check. There's no way that arch Remainer Keir Starmer or Jonathan Reynolds or anyone else in this Labour government is going to advocate deregulating, removing all tariff barriers and all the rest of it. Jacob, or am I being too negative?
Well, it's funny how politics works, isn't it? That things that the Conservatives couldn't possibly do, it looks as if the Labour Party may be on the cusp of doing. That these extreme Europhile, lovey-dovey EU people are finding that the reality of Donald Trump saying there are very high tariffs if you don't lower your tariffs, discovering that the advantages of free trade deal with the US are quite strong. And it's force majeure. It's not that this is what they wanted to do. It's not what they went in politics to do. But we may find we get a freer trade deal because of what Trump has done from a socialist British government than we were able to get from a Conservative one dealing with a Democrat president.
But isn't it politically so damaging to the Conservatives? We were discussing this the other day. Ian Duncan Smith came in. I don't remember if you were party to these discussions. When Trump was over at some point between 2016 and 2020, I can't remember which visit it was, I think IDS and others went in to see him, and he basically almost half agreed to a free trade deal. And Woody Johnson, the US ambassador to the UK at the time, is going, no, no, no. And Trump's saying to IDS, and maybe even Owen Paterson, I can't remember who it was, I like you guys. We can do a deal. There was an opportunity to do a deal with the Tory government, and it didn't happen. Do you know anything about that, Jacob, or why it didn't happen?
I don't think it was as easy as you're suggesting. Bear in mind that at that point Trump didn't have a majority in Congress, and Congress has authority over approval of free trade deals. Now, there was a fast-track arrangement, but Trump was also coming to the end of his period in office. We had COVID getting in the way, and therefore, had Trump won in 2020 and Biden not come in, then I think there was every chance for free trade deal being done, but it ran out of time.
Fair enough.
You used to, when you were in government, you were working on Brexit freedoms. Are there still too many overhangs of European regulations in the UK which we have yet to deal with? And we need to deal with them if we are ever going to get a proper free trade deal with the United States and, frankly, many other countries around the world.
Oh, yes, there's still masses. For instance, we still have a tariff on oranges. Now, even in Somerset, where the climate is perfect for everything, as is a veritable Garden of Eden, we don't grow many oranges. We are simply harming British consumers by having a tariff on oranges, and these exist because they existed in the EU to protect the southern European orange growers. All those sorts of things should go. Very regrettably, the last government didn't carry through with the retained EU law bill, which would have scrapped all retained EU regulations, and we would have regulated things that we actually needed to, rather than things that just happened to be regulated. It's such a pity that work wasn't completed. It was one of the great missed opportunities of the Sunak period.
And it wasn't completed by Kemi Badenoch, which may explain why you supported Robert Jenrick in that leadership campaign.
As I said, I think it was a great missed opportunity.
When it comes to issues like animal welfare, farming regulation, agriculture, we've had Tom Bradshaw, the head of the National Farmers Union, on the television today saying there are red lines in the UK against some American imports into the United Kingdom. We've all heard of the chlorine-washed chicken. How dangerous that actually is for debate. But there is also issues around beef, for example. Should we say that if it is safe in America, food should be able to be imported into the United Kingdom, even if the farming industry in the UK does not want that?
Do either of you eat salad?
We do. Well, I speak for you,
I
Camilla,
try
I'm
and eat as
assuming.
much as I can, Jacob.
Well, you see, I never eat salad, but this isn't because it's chlorine washed. I don't eat salad because I think it's ghastly rabbit food. But it's chlorine washed when it's sold in supermarkets in packages, and we don't bat an eyelid. This is the absolute straightforward NFU protectionist operation. The NFU is fundamentally protectionist. This doesn't actually help British farmers. It leads to higher prices for consumers and discourages our farmers from being more efficient. Of course we should allow in goods that are safe in the United States. The US is highly regulated. It has more of an outcomes regulatory approach rather than a process regulatory approach, but the result is broadly the same. And this is where chlorine wash comes in. The EU regulated on the basis that you should look after your chickens in a certain way, and then there wasn't any salmonella in the end product. The US said that we should have a chlorine wash at the end, so there isn't any salmonella in the end product. So neither product has salmonella. Actually, US chickens have less salmonella than European chickens.
But part of it is animal welfare, then,
It's a
isn't
better way of doing it.
So you're saying we could maybe reduce animal welfare as long as there's not
We already
salmonella
do.
in the out-
We already accept much lower animal welfare from other European countries. We have high animal welfare standards in this country, but we accept lower animal welfare in goods that are coming in from Poland and other EU countries. This is completely bogus. It's just a straight protectionist argument. And to be brutal about it, these animals are going to be killed in the end anyway. You know, we're going to eat them. That's the point. And the talk of animal welfare is primarily a protectionist effort to stop goods coming in. I think British farmers are very efficient and can compete globally, but they could probably benefit from an element of deregulation. So I am in favour of a level playing field. But our tariffs on US beef, 65% tariff on US beef beyond the tariff rate quota, that doesn't help British farmers, it helps Irish farmers, with whom we have an £800 million a year trade deficit on beef. I don't care about Irish farmers. They're not my responsibility. I care about British consumers getting access to cheaper foodstuffs. So yes, of course we should do that, and we should never listen to the NFU on these sorts of things. It is a straightforward protectionist body that loved being in the EU. The NFU constantly campaigned to be in the EU in spite of the horrors of the Common Agricultural Policy.
And a final word, because I know you are a little bit of a petrol head. Is that fair enough to say, Jacob?
Oh yeah, completely fair.
On the UK car industry, you are the owner of a Rolls-Royce.
Bentley, actually.
Is
but-
it a Bentley? I'm so sorry to confuse both luxury brands. Aren't you worried about the Bentleys and the Rolls-Royces and the Jaguar Land Rovers of this world?
Well, my most modern Bentley was made in 1968, and my older Bentley was made in 1936. So it's not immediate and pressing in terms of my own personal consumption of Bentleys, though I think they're wonderful cars. We have a tariff on US cars. Why? And we have environmental regulations that make it harder for US cars to be sold in the UK because they tend to be bigger and therefore emit more. So if we have a level playing field for the US, if we took all our tariff off US cars and we changed our environmental regulations so they weren't hit by particularly onerous emissions targets, then they might do the same for us. But free trade always works. I think what Donald Trump is doing from an American perspective is not beneficial. That the benefits of consumers get ignored when you apply tariffs because you make goods more expensive for them. You make their standard of living lower. On the other hand, America has found that it hasn't got other people to lower tariffs by behaving gently, and he's gone in with a big stick. I don't think it's the right way to make policy, but it may prove to be effective. And if it does prove to be effective, both the UK and the US consumer will benefit. We can have cheaper food prices. We can have access to American cars, possibly financial services from America more freely. We can have a more competitive, cheaper market. It reduces inflation, lowers the cost of people's groceries. Beautiful word, groceries.
Isn't it just?
Yes, one of our favourite words. Wasn't that a marvellous point of his speech yesterday? There's delight in this word, groceries.
Groceries.
An old-fashioned term that we use, groceries. I used it on the campaign. It's such an old-fashioned term, but a beautiful term, groceries. It sort of says a bag with different things in it.
Although I
Yes.
can't quite see Ed Miliband allowing gas-guzzling super trucks on the mean streets of North London, where you live, Kamal, at the end of the day.
No.
I just can't see this happening.
Absolutely right.
We need to ask you something else completely unrelated to tariffs. Do you mind?
Depends
We've got a
what-
story on the Telegraph today,
Depends
Jacob.
what it is.
Well, we've got
Well,
a
I feel a little underdressed. Jacob, if I'd known you were coming into the podcast this morning, I would have put a suit and tie on. Frankly, I'm a
Indeed.
little bit casual today. But on the Telegraph website today is a piece about ties. The New York Times has done this big piece on whether ties are still a necessary part of male attire.
It was in
Now,
the,
of
it
course,
was in the New York Times.
New York Times.
New York
Isn't this
Times.
fake news?
Yes,
Well,
it is.
now,
a
now.
left-wing rag.
A left-wing
out
fake
of-
news
out of-
failing
yes.
newspaper.
So exactly
Okay,
that. But
yeah.
just to one side for the moment.
Okay.
They have
Why
said,
is the Telegraph picking up things from a fake news outlet?
Because we like stories about ties. And Telegraph readers like ties.
Okay.
Like you like
And not-
ties,
not-
and you are
not-
a Telegraph
okay.
reader, are you not, Jacob
and not
Rees-Mogg?
what we used to call Siam, just to be clear.
No, indeed so.
Indeed.
Quite. So, no, I'm not talking about the tie, people. I'm talking about the tie around your neck right now.
Yes.
Right. Couple of questions on
Oh,
ties.
this tie, well, I'll tell you about this tie. This tie is rather splendid. There used to be a wonderful lady, who now sadly no longer with us, who from the war until her death lunched every day in Claridge's.
Sounds
Every single
ideal.
day. And I used to see her in there in the old dining room. And after seeing her there on a number of occasions, we had lunch together. And when we had lunch together, I gave her lunch. She gave me this tie, and she gave me this tie saying, and she was in her 90s by then. She said, I thought I'd better give you your tie, because all your ties are so boring. I thought I'd better give you one with some colour in it. So it was
that is your jazzy tie.
That is my most.
Is this your most jazzy
This is my
tie?
most jazzy tie given to me by the wonderful, now deceased Mrs. Ross, who was a great regular. She was an absolute institution in Claridge's, splendid. She got given a special price because she'd been going so long, which I thought was very nice of her.
All right, so let's do the tie test
All
then.
right, the tie test.
So, what's the best way to tie a tie? What knot would you be using if you're tying a tie?
I have no idea. I just tie a tie in the most simple way.
Well, do you do a double loop round?
No, I do a single. I just loop it round and pull it down.
Apparently you should be double looping.
No, I shouldn't. That's
Well, our expert disagrees.
well, you're
I
expert.
think you may be doing then, Jacob, what's called a half Windsor, which
Yeah,
is
but
the
we're-
tie knot I learnt at school,
Yes.
and it's the only one I can actually
That's
do.
right. That's right. And a Windsor knot is a pretense that you're using thicker silk than you really are,
If you do a full Windsor,
and
yes.
is bogus and
Yes.
not a gentleman's knot.
Okay.
But I believe that the Trump White House use the full Windsor. But I'm not suggesting that you're suggesting that makes it bogus
He's
for
American,
them.
it's different.
But
That's
he's
so
American.
Donald, though, isn't it? My tie's bigger than your tie.
Yes.
Second question. Should we be wearing regimental and club ties in general if we do belong to regiments and clubs?
Almost never.
Really? Why?
You can wear your ties for a regimental reunion, but we're not in the Macmillan era when Macmillan swapped his Brigade of Guards tie for his OE tie, and as far as I'm aware, he only had two ties.
Fair enough.
And just, would you ever wear...
Can't believe you're going to ask
I know,
this.
I'm going to ask this. I did check this with Camilla before we came into the
I said
studio.
it was a bad idea, but anyway.
Would you ever wear a knitted tie?
No.
No.
Knitted
Of course
ties,
not.
Camilla, were made for the working classes, apparently, because they were easier to make than silk ties from readily available wool.
Very
Couple
good.
more questions.
And supports the wool industry, but I wouldn't wear one. I don't have one.
If you wore a bow tie, would you wear a traditional one that you tied yourself?
Do other types exist?
And do you ever wear cravats?
No.
Final question, actually. This was one from the producers who are a bit Gen Z. If you went to a
Z.
I'm saying Gen Z because that's the common way in which it's said, although it is an
Not
Americanism.
here. We may want to get a
We
free
call
trade
it-
deal with
Yeah,
America,
we're
but we're
not going to adopt
we're not
American
going that far.
pronunciation.
I'm so sorry. You're sounding like you're channeling your inner Simon Heffer now. Question
man.
one, have you ever been to a nightclub?
Yes, I have.
Question two, did you wear a tie when you went?
Well, I think, well, of course I would have worn a tie. I mean, I always wear a tie
Every
everywhere,
day?
every day.
What
yes.
if you're relaxing in Somerset?
I
Do
would
you-
always wear a tie. Wouldn't my
Relaxing in Somerset, in your
Yes.
garden, in the sunshine, on a Sunday afternoon, you will
I
be
would
in a
always
tie.
have a tie. Always have a tie.
Wow.
Yes, I think my
When
head
do
would
you-
fall off if I didn't.
When do you take a tie off?
When I get ready for bed, I put a tie on when I get dressed in the morning, and I take a tie off.
Right.
If I'm dressing for dinner, I will swap from a long tie to a bow tie, but that's the only
How about
change.
on a foreign holiday if it's really, really hot?
Why would I take a tie off on a foreign holiday if it's really, really hot?
Why would you go on a holiday to a foreign place anyway? You've got
When the weather
beautiful
in Somerset
Somerset.
is perfect.
On that bombshell, I'm just going to leave you with this final thought, and I'm going to quote my former editor, Martin Townsend. "Reporters who wear ties get stories," he once said in a news conference. I said, "Even the women?" He said, "Especially the women." Thank you very much for
Thank you,
amusing
Jacob.
us
That's
with
brilliant.
that, Jacob.
Not at all.